All right, so today what we're going to talk about is lighting. Now we've had a little bit, a couple of small conversations about lights inside of Moto, but today we're really going to dive deep and really digest and understand all the moving parts when it comes to working with lighting. And in every sense, the lighting and the rendering side of our 3D art pipeline is the most important part, right? Because at this stage, we're fundamentally creating what our audience is going to interact with, right? You've heard me say this many times before, but really, when it comes to 3D, this is going to sound interesting, especially given that I just talked about this whole real-time rendering bit. We're not in the business of 3D, right? We're in the business of 2D, because our audience is only ever going to interact and manipulate a two-dimensional image or have an experience with a two-dimensional image, right? Something on a movie screen or a television, or maybe something that they see in front of you on an image, okay? How we present that piece of sculpture and how we choose to focus our audience's attention on that piece of artwork is found at the rendering stage, okay? It's very easy to take a great 3D model and ruin it with bad lighting, okay? Today's conversation is going to be about how to create good lighting, and I'm going to introduce kind of a thought process that we should go through to ensure that we're capturing the correct moment and presenting it in a way that makes it really consumable for our audience, okay? Far too often we rely exclusively on the indirect lighting setup, global illumination, that background, if you will, inside of Moto, to establish the lighting setup in our scene, and that is really not a great strategy to begin with, okay? So I'm going to talk about how we can turn off all the lights inside of Moto and start from scratch and look at exactly what our lights are achieving inside of our scene itself, okay? In every sense, we had to change hats once again. If you go back in time to the beginning of the semester, I mentioned that in the 3D art pipeline, we have to wear many hats. At times, we're going to be great sculptors, creating these wonderful works of art, kind of similar to how a sculptor would create their works of art out here in the real world. Other times, we take off the construction hat or the sculptor hat, and we put on a painter's hat, and we start looking at how we paint the surface of our object to create these wonderful illusions, right? Other times, we'll take that hat off and put another hat on and put, and play the role of a photographer and look at how we can compose an image to really draw focus and attention to the subject matter of that frame. And then also, we have to put on another hat, a hat of a lighting director or a gaffer, as it's called out there in the film world, and look at how we can use the lights in our scenes to continue to mold and sculpt our objects inside the render itself. It's wicked easy to make a flat image inside of Moto. We want to be able to create some drama and some change in tonal value across the subject to create an illusion of three-dimensionality. It's a little bit of a challenge. You're going to be spending the next 20 years of your career studying lighting, okay? It's not an easy part of our pipeline. The rendering component to this is a challenge. We have to look at it from a very, very different perspective in comparison to the modeling and the texturing stage of our pipeline. I've often said that 3D artists are usually the best all-around artists because we have to look at our artwork from a number of different perspectives. From a sculptural perspective, a painterly perspective, a cinematographer or a photographer, and then we also have to be a lighting director as well. Having command of these four big kind of tentpole ideas will really ensure that what we're creating is impactful, okay? To help you guys out, of course, you can have the live stream today to kind of fuel your continual learning of all of this jazz. But I've also created some dedicated videos here in D2L that really kind of break out each what I'm about to talk about into small kind of digestible kind of component pieces. The things that you'll definitely want to take a look at again is that 3-point lighting setup video that I've placed right here, okay? That's a good one to kind of bookmark and keep coming back to, because the 3-point lighting setup is going to be a great tool to help you very quickly describe your model with light, okay? We have 2 missions that we're going to be striving to accomplish this week. Our last homework assignment, yeah! You're going to be making a robot, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this here in a minute. The robot, in every sense, is a culminating experience about everything that we've talked about in this class, right? Hopefully, you'll be able to use the power of the subdivision surface engine to create some really compelling characters, right? pair that with Mesh Fusion and everything that we've learned about 3D modeling this semester, we're going to strive to create a character. And you're going to be kind of on your own on this one as you look to create your own unique character. And we'll talk more about this in detail as we get towards the end of class today. It's going to be due next week. Yeah, it's going to be a fast turnaround. Yeah, because starting next week, we're going to be a full court press on our final project. Okay, and then we're going to have some lab time today to talk about, to allow you guys to get some practice with the 3-point lighting setup. In addition, I'm hoping to use this lab time to give you some direct feedback on the 3D print designs that you submitted to the Dropbox or are about to submit to the Dropbox. Okay, it's important that we go through a review cycle on that and make changes before we really start printing them out to reduce any sort of print errors or reprints over the next couple weeks. All right, with that said, let's jump over into Moto and begin to look at lighting. And I encourage you to follow along. I'm going to use some presets that come with Moto. This is nothing kind of custom made. It's all stuff that comes with the application. Once Moto decides it wants to launch here, I'm going to go over into the Layout tab inside of our interface and fire open my Mesh preset browser. And let's see. Here we go. Let's just jump in real fast. Here's the Layout tab. And I'm in the Mesh preset browser down here at the bottom. And remember, this top bar, this one right here, this is kind of the best way to navigate the complex folder hierarchy of our preset browser. And I'm going to go into, I've forgotten which one it is now. It's into Exterior. Okay, it's not into Exterior. It is under Household Objects. And apparently, I don't have the capacity to think straight today because it's not in Household Objects. Interior, that's what I'm after. And then I'm after Decorative Accessories. And let's see, I'm going to do this little vase. I'm going to double click on this vase, and it's going to load it at the origin of my scene. Pretty cool. I also want to create a cool little ground shadow, because often the best way to understand and the fastest way to understand the differences in the lights inside of our 3D apps is to look at the type of shadow that this light is creating on our object. So I'm going to simply return to my preset browser, and this time I know where it is. It's in the Basics section of our preset browser. And what I'm going to double click on is this shadow catcher. That way, when I fire off a render here in a minute, you'll see the shadow that's going to be overlaid onto the background of our environment. Now, for the rest of the day, I'm going to be hanging out inside of the render layout. Let's cruise over there, and just for giggles, let's just fire off a render real fast and take a look at what the computer has created for us. Okay, I want to zoom in just to make my vase a little bit bigger. All right, so there it is. Here's where we're going to begin, and I'm going to keep this relative composition the same as we go through our conversation today. Okay. There are a number of different types of lights inside of Moto. From your experience so far, and from our previous very basic conversation about lighting, what is the basic light type that's immediately applied to every single scene inside of Moto? The directional light. You got it. And what type of illusion? And I have the directional light firing off of my vase here. What type of illusion is the directional light achieving and creating for us? Yes, absolutely. An exterior light source like the sun, okay? If you think about it, the sun is a never-ending wall of light. It's inescapable, right? If you were standing out in the middle of a field, you couldn't ever, run away or hide from the light, right? You're always going to be in it unless you go, under a tree or something, right? A directional light is the exact same thing in Moto. It's an infinite wall of light that's coming from a specific orientation inside of our scene. Now, the cool thing about the way the render layout's been created here is that we get access down in the bottom to a wonderful OpenGL window that communicates pretty directly all of the players inside of our scene. Now, if you are looking at your GL window and you don't see an icon for the camera or the light, keep in mind these are viewport properties. So if I put my cursor in the viewport and hit the O key, the visibility section is going to yield what we're after, and it is right there. Show lights and show cameras. I'll click off of the form to dismiss it. Let's select our directional light, because that's what it is. You can see a nice visualization of that infinite wall of light. Okay? Now, the cool thing about working with a directional light is that we can change the orientation of this light just by moving and manipulating the transform information. So let's just do it here real fast. Okay. The camera, right. So if you're only seeing the preview window, try clicking on this little double arrow in the upper right-hand corner. It's going to maximize or minimize that window. That solve your problem? Say again? In the visibility section of our viewport properties, I enabled show lights and show cameras. Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, they should already be on, but from time to time, folks turn them off. Yeah, oh, so you have a different problem on your hand here, AJ. Yeah, you're not looking at your 3D scene through the perspective view. You're looking at it through the camera view. So by clicking on the little oval, see how mine says perspective? Go into this button. Yours says camera or render camera. Okay? Just go into perspective, and then you'll be able to zip around and not have it influence. Well, remember, you need to look at your scene through the perspective view. So go up one on that list, and it should say perspective. Okay. Let's just change some of the location of our directional light here real fast and understand which transform channels are really most important when it comes to working with a directional light. Okay? So check it out. I'm going to move my directional light. Just going to fire off the move tool. And if I move it to the other side of the scene, does anything change on my vase? No, not a single thing. Moving, changing the position of your directional light is not going to do a single thing. The rotation of your directional light is going to have a big impact on the effect that we find in the preview window. So if I fire off the rotation tools, check it out. Hit the E key to fire off rotation. And now when I rotate this thing around the y-axis, you can see that I'm changing the orientation of the directional light in the scene, and the shadow and the direction of illumination is changing inside of the render itself. So when it comes to working with directional lights, the position of the directional light does not matter. It could literally be inside your vase, not going to make an impact on it. The orientation, the rotation of your directional light is absolutely going to have a direct impact on the type of illumination being cast out into our scene. Now, if I want to maximize my view here just for a second, to make it a little bit easier for you guys in the back to see what the preview engine is creating for us. Now, if we look at the image of my vase, and specifically if we look at the shadow that the directional light is creating for my vase, how would you kind of visually describe that shadow? What's it look like? One thing, as I look around the room, I can see a lot of you guys following along. I'll give you a little helpful hint here. If your image looks very contrasty in preview, very, very dark, okay, go to this little button. This is going to change the lookup table, which changes the color profile of the rendering engine. Right now, I'm going to guess that some of you, it says none or default. Put it to sRGB, and it's going to look identical to what you see on my screen. Okay. The sRGB color profile is the color profile that computer monitors use, but it's not the only color profile that is used outside in our industry, and it's nice that we can change that. Okay, so how would you describe that ground shadow? Visually, how would you describe it? What's it look like? I like it, so you can see its edges. So it's very crisp. The edges are very defined. Almost looks like a cookie cutter of our vase. Does this look real? No, shadows don't look like this. You know, I think the sun's out. We may have some clouds out at the moment, but if the sun were out and if we were to go out and look at the shadow that the sun will be creating for us, right? Let's pretend that the sun is behind me, my shadow is being displayed out in front of me, right? What would it look like?
The lines around the shadow wouldn't be crisp because the light when it hits you diffuses.
You got it.
So your shadow is going to...
Yeah, the edges are all going to be blurry, right? And as the shadow, goes away from your feet, the part of the shadow that represents your head on the floor, it's going to be more transparent as well. So there's two things that happen. The edges get more soft or blurry as they travel away from its parent, and the shadow becomes more transparent as it travels away from its parent object. Not at all what we're seeing here, right? This is a hallmark tell of something that's computer generated, right? Because computers, they're just following the rules of a mathematical situation. Our mathematical situation hasn't been customized to present a photorealistic result. Point being, all lights have properties that we need to adjust to help us march closer and closer and closer to a more realistic or photorealistic result. Note that I got my directional light selected in my item list. And of course, our properties tab is going to give us all the properties for that light. Specifically, we're going to go into, I need to scroll down a little bit so we can see all the properties. Here, I'll do this. I'll just collapse the transform category. And now we can see all the directional light properties pretty easily. So there's really two that we need to focus on when it comes to working with the directional light. From our previous conversation about the directional light, does anyone remember what option kind of gives us that nice kind of blurry shadow look? The spread angle. Yeah, absolutely. Note that the spread angle degree is at 0. A little bit of spread goes a long way. Check it out. I want to put my spread angle from 0. Let's just put it to 3 degrees. And if you look very, very closely, way out over here on our shadows, right? Look at the tip of the shadow. All of this jazz. Look at that. That's some good stuff right there. Blurry. The edges get real soft as the shadow goes back towards its parent object, the vase. Check it out. Down over here, very crisp, and then it starts to lose energy and it diffuses as it goes away from, as it goes further and further away from its parent, which is kind of nice. Okay. So the spread angle, a little bit. Don't give a whole lot, right? If you start doing, like some people like, let's do like a 15 degrees spread angle. Let's really blur it out some, and yeah, that's really not going to give you the best result. A little bit of spread angle goes a long, long way. Okay. Okay. Now the other thing that we have to look at is brightness. Maybe I want my vase to be significantly brighter, or maybe I want the directional light within inside of my scene to be brighter, which will then create an illusion that the vase is brighter, right? Which property over here in our directional light settings is going to allow me to increase the brightness? Unfortunately not. Radiance, you got it. Radiant excedence, right? Which is a fancy science term for brightness, okay? One of the cool things about working inside of the Moto rendering engine is that it's a physically based rendering environment. So it's actually firing out little light rays, little photons from our light sources. It's calculating how far those photons are traveling, the intensity of the photons when it leaves the light source, and the intensity of that photon when it intersects or reflects off of an object, right? It's a pretty fancy bit of technology. And in every sense, almost at every single level, it's trying to recreate how the properties of light out here in the real world are what they're doing, okay? So if you want to make your light brighter or dimmer, it's the radiant excedence. Let's do it real fast. Let's just put it to a value of 1. Yeah, and now you can see that the illumination quality of our light is just a little bit darker. If we put it to 0.5, now it's very, very dark. And if we put it to 0, now it's off, right? And herein lies one of the biggest challenges that we have to work with when it comes to working inside of the Moto rendering engine. I've turned off that light, basically. I've put its brightness value down to 0. So the light rays leaving that light source don't have any energy associated with them. They're off, okay? But yet we still see the vase. What's going on? Why do we still see the vase? Any takers? What's causing this general illumination inside of our scene? The environment. You got it. That gray sphere, if you will, that all of our scene participants are kind of living in, are providing illumination. Okay? We're going to get kind of a false read at times as to the impact and the role of each one of these lights. We're going to turn it off here in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention, that the environment is an active participant in the effect that we're creating upon render, okay? It's called indirect illumination. The environment is actually sending out its own series of little photons, and those photons are interacting with the surface, and we're creating a very, very kind of a cool result. Let's turn the visibility of my light back on. Put its illumination properties back down to 3, and continue our conversation about lights. Okay? So the directional light is like the sun. It's an exterior light source. But it's not the only direct light source that we can create inside of our scene, right? And if we wanted to add more lights or to change a type of light, we're going to do all that work over here in our item list. So if I wanted to add a new light, we certainly could go into the Add Item pull-down menu and choose Lights. And here are all the different types of lights that we can create inside of Moto. There's a whole bunch of them. We're not going to go through all of them today, but there are some rock stars in here that we absolutely need to address, specifically the point light, the spotlight, and the area light. We're going to talk about those directly, but as you can see, there's some other really good ones in there, okay? Like the dome light, that's pretty neat. The photometric light is pretty neat as well. I'll let you explore those on your own. They're pretty neat. So we can create lights by going into the Add Item pull-down menu. However, here's a great little trick, and one that I've been doing for a long, long time. We can also change a light's properties inside the item list. Because I don't necessarily want to create a new light. I want to change my directional light into another light type. Let's do it real fast. By right-clicking on a light inside the item list, you're going to get this contextual menu. And then right there, wonderful, we have Change Type. So now we're physically changing what type of light this is going to behave as inside of our item list. And I think I'm going to change my directional light over into a point light, which is one of my favorites. Notice that the icons changed, the name of the light's changed, and of course down here inside of our scene, the illumination properties of this light have fundamentally changed, okay? Now, point lights, and let me minimize my preview window to get my 3D window back. There it is. Here's my point light. Point lights, in every sense, are kind of like the opposite of a directional light. If you remember, a directional light really only understands the rotation properties. It's an infinite wall of light coming from a specific area inside of our scene, right? A point light, so we can move our directional light around as much as we want. It's not going to change it. A point light is kind of the opposite. We want to be able to, or we don't rotate point lights, we move them. And as I move my point light closer, it's going to begin to illuminate my little vase.
How do you change the tool set? Because right now my tool set is stuck on a XYZ rotation, and I can't get it to...
Okay, so what's the keyboard shortcut to fire off the Move tool? Does anyone remember? That's rotation. The Move tool is W. W. Okay, so if the directional light is like the sun, just based on the icon down here in the OpenGL viewport, what type of illusion is the point light creating? What type of real-world comparison or analog can we create to the point light? Yes, absolutely. It's like a light bulb. It's like a lamp, okay? It's a single point in space, a single dot, a vert, if you will, and light rays are being emitted in every direction from that point, okay? Like a light bulb. Directional light, it's like the sun. Point light, like a light bulb, okay? Now, point lights, the closer we get our point light to our subject, the more impact it's going to have on that subject, okay? So you can see the relationship of my point light to my vase. As I'll bring it out right in front here. Yeah, and as I continue to move it around, watch the shadow here, okay? Moving my point light is going to change the illumination. Now, light rays are being emitted from every direction from this point in space, right? Think of it like an orb, a glowing orb, okay? They're going everywhere. The icons inside the OpenGL viewport do a great job of communicating the type of light, the type of illumination each one of these lights are going to use. So keep that in mind. Use the icons. They're helpful. They really are. Point lights are pretty nice. Point lights are kind of one of the original light types inside of our CG industry. They're very quick to render. They don't take a lot of energy for the computer to figure out how it's illuminating our scene. So they make it a very powerful light type, especially when we're creating complex lighting setups. At times, they can feel a little bit uncontrollable, and they kind of are, right? Because they're just providing general illumination from, into the area. There's one property of a point light that I like. It's kind of neat. If you look over here, of course, in our point light properties, we have the intensity. We can also change the color. But this radius is pretty neat too, right? Because right now, the point light is kind of, the light rays are being emitted from a single little dot, right? A vertice inside of our three-dimensional scene. If we increase the radius, we're going to create kind of like an orb. And this orb is going to be hollow on the inside. Let me show you a great example of what this looks like in the scene, and then I think you'll start to understand the importance of this radius property. So I'm going to increase the radius. There we go. We get a cool little visualization over there. There it goes. There it is. Ta-da. Now, light rays are only being emitted on the outside of this orb. So if our subject, the vase, is on the inside of this orb, it's going to be dark. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I want to move my point light with my increased radius into my sphere, or into my, my vase. There we go. Let me move it back a little bit more. Yeah. And now you can kind of see this change of illumination. The top part of our vase is inside the orb, okay? And is not being illuminated by the point light itself, okay? Allows us to create a very different effect, okay? Because some light bulbs, well, all light bulbs have a volume, right? Have a volume. All right. Point lights are a lot of fun. I like working with point lights. Let's look at one more called the spotlight. Once again, I'm going to return to my item list and right-click on my light source and choose Change Type from the contextual menu, and spotlight is going to be way down here at the bottom. So if the directional light is like the sun, and if the point light is like a light bulb, the spotlight, and let's just turn it on so we can look at it. The spotlight is going to simulate something that we are probably a little bit more accustomed to seeing in like a theater, right? If you think about it, a directional light only really evaluates the rotation properties of that item, right? A point light really only evaluates the position channels of that item. Well, with the spotlight, it's a hybrid of them both, right? It's evaluating both rotation and position inside of our three-dimensional scene. It creates kind of like a light that you'd expect to see in a theater, or like a flashlight, right? Where we now can aim the light, change its rotation, and change its position, allowing us to create a very complex lighting setup that yields some pretty great results. You got it. And you're reading my notes here, which is kind of cool. With my light selected here, I've hit the Y key. Y is in Yankee. Y is in yak. Okay. The Y key opens up what's called the item transform tool. And on the surface, what it allows us to do is to manipulate both the position, scale, and rotation of our item. But for certain items inside the scene, and this light here is a great example, it gives us some additional interface, these little purple rings that start to communicate a couple other properties that are important for this light type. This light type, the spotlight, has a cone of illumination, just like a flashlight, right? And we get to change that cone angle to make a real kind of narrow spotlight beam, or we can make the cone pretty wide to cast a bigger illumination out into our scene. We can interactively do this by manipulating the little blue cubes, all of these guys down here. So if I, oops, I'm zoomed in, so it's freaking out. But if I grab these little blue cubes, I can interactively change the cone of illumination. This one here on the inside with the dotted line, this is going to change the fall off of the light. If you've ever been to a theater, it's kind of impossible to see in this particular lighting setup. But if you've ever been to a theater, you see like an actor standing on the stage and the spotlight's on him. And if you look at the circle of light that's being cast on the stage, sometimes it's like a real crisp edge, right? That's the fall off. And at times that edge is real kind of blurred and soft. Well, we're changing that with that inside circle, okay? When it's like this, there's no fall off, right? When it's in here like that, now it's going to be a real nice, soft kind of area of illumination. Here's kind of a great trick, something that I use quite frequently when I'm working with spotlights, because often we want to aim our spotlights at a very specific item inside the scene. Now, at times, kind of figuring out this aim is kind of tricky inside the OpenGL viewport, right? Because now we're having to manage both the position of our spotlight and its rotation in relationship to the subject matter. The guys and gals down at the Foundry have done us a solid favor here, and they've given us the ability to look through our light and to see what it's seeing. It's a viewport property. So if we go into the upper left-hand corner of every GL viewport in the application, of course we can change our viewport to look at a number of different views of our scene. But check it out. We can also look through our light. And this is really helpful when trying to position your light. Yeah, so right now what I'm seeing down in this part of my interface is what my light's seeing. And if I use my viewport navigation controls, I can go in, I can get a little closer, I can put my light kind of where I want it to be and customize. Yeah, there we go. And now we can actually see the shadow showing up. My light's pointing directly at the object, okay, which is kind of neat. It's just really helpful to quickly point our lights where we want them to point at. Oops. Yeah, it's pretty cool. There we go. Now, I've noticed with spotlights and most of the lights inside of Moto that they have to be either really close to the object to get pretty good illumination, or we really have to increase the brightness of the lights to get the result that we're after, okay? There's a give and a take here. And this is something that we'll have to kind of build and create as we go through our rendering pipeline. Pretty cool, huh? It's pretty cool. All right. What I would like to do now is focus your attention onto the type of shadow that the spotlight is creating, okay? As I mentioned before, often the easiest way to understand the impact of a light is to look at the shadow. How would you describe, once again, the shadow the spotlight's creating? There we go. Many apologies. Kind of, a little bit. It's similar. It's similar to that of the directional light. I would call this a pretty hard shadow, okay? The profile of the shadow is incredibly crisp. It's one of the characteristics of a spotlight, okay? Keep that in mind, and I want you to kind of log that away as we transition this light into the next light type, which is one of my favorites. It's called the area light. I'm going to right-click on my spotlight in my item list and create an area light. Right-click, change type, area light. Now, an area light is very, very different, okay? Immediately, I want you just to examine on my screen here, or maybe on your own, the type of shadow that an area light is creating. Very diffuse, very soft. Area lights create this nice kind of even, soft illumination out into our scene. These are really, really great interior lights, okay? If you think about it, these fluorescent tubes inside the ceiling produce really soft shadows, okay? If you were trying to do like an interior shot, something similar to what you'd see in like a photographer studio, their big soft box lights create this nice soft light where the light's kind of scattering across the surfaces of our objects, okay? I like area lights. They're pretty neat, okay? However, area lights are a little bit different from the previous 3 direct light types that we've been looking at. If we go back down into our viewport down here, you can see that the icon once again has changed. Now, this icon is really, really important. It's more than just a visualization of the orientation and position of our light. It actually describes the total area that the light rays are being emitted into our scene. Light rays are only coming from the inside of that square. Check it out. They're only coming from in here. Okay? An area light. Light rays are only being created inside the area of that little square. One of the great things about working, oh, and I forgot to mention this, that little arrow coming from the center of the square, what do you think that represents?
The direction that the photons.
You got it. The direction the light is facing inside of our scene. Now, one of the cool things about an area light is that we can customize the size of its light. So if I hit the item transform tool, or any of the transform tools, check it out. On the actual light itself, the computer's drawn some light blue cubes, which will allow us to interactively change the size of that light. Big lights are pretty nice. I like the effect that we create with big lights. The light rays kind of seemingly wrap around our subject, and it creates a more kind of pleasing illumination on our objects themselves. I like big lights. They're kind of nice to work with. Now, area lights come at a cost, okay? They're going to take a little bit longer to render, because in every sense, an area light is really playing inside of our indirect global illumination engine itself, right? We're actually calculating bounces with area lights. Photons are actually being generated from the inside of the light, and they're bouncing around our scene like little bullets, okay? It takes a little bit longer to render an area light, but man, the results are going to be pretty pleasing. I like area lights very much, okay? Shoot, let's just do a comparison real fast, and I think I can do this quickly. Just for academic purposes only, I'm going to change my area light back into a spotlight. Yep, okay. And let's just make a render real fast. So now, there it goes. It goes pretty fast. Spotlights and point lights and directional lights, they're pretty fast. They're not going to take a lot of energy. There it is. So with the spotlight, my little vase, and with global illumination turned on, it took, 7.9 seconds to draw that frame. Not bad. Let's change our spotlight to an area light. Let's examine how long it takes now. Go. Let's render. Boom, 16 seconds, right? So twice as long, a 100% increase in render time from changing it from a spotlight to an area light. So area lights come at a cost, but the results that we get are pretty great, okay? If we compare and contrast, here's the spotlight, here's the area light. Spotlight, area light. Now, the differences that I'm seeing, of course, the shadow itself, very, very crisp and defined with the spotlight. But in addition, I want you guys to zoom in and kind of focus on the specular highlight that's being drawn on the surface of my vase. From our previous conversations about the rendering technology inside of Moto, and just rendering technologies as a whole, what in the world is a specular highlight? I've zoomed in on it to help focus your attention. Yeah, it's the shiny bit, right? It's that little white reflection that we see on the surface of the vase, right? The specular highlight, and I'll draw focus to it here in a second, the specular highlight, in every sense, is a reflection of the light source. There it is, right there. That's the specular highlight. Now check out the quality of the specular highlight here with the spotlight. And as I advance my preview, let me zoom out. Here it is with the area light. Oops, excuse me. Here it is with the area light. Spotlight. I can even zoom in here. Oops. Spotlight, area light. Spotlight, area light. Every bit about the area light is going to create these soft illumination rays, okay? The specular highlight is not as pronounced, it's not as intense. Something that we should keep in mind and consider when establishing our lighting setups, right? Because if we need a really crisp, defined specular highlight, well, maybe the area light isn't the best option for us, okay? All right, so let's start creating a good render here, because these are pretty horrible renders. I'm so over and done with that gray background inside of Moto. I hate that gray background, right? We don't live in a gray world, so I want to get out of this gray world as much as we can. In addition, escaping this gray world also will help establish a really nice technique on how we should approach the lighting setup of each one of our scenes. In every sense, this phase is kind of similar to how a lighting director or a gaffer would operate out there in the real world. Imagine you are holding a light and you're placing this light, you're kind of running around and placing this light in different areas in your scene. The lights in Motos behave very, very similarly to the way lights out here in the real world work, which is kind of nice. It's one of the reasons why Moto is used so prominently in the product world, right? Because traditional photographers that are used to taking a picture of this actual vase can do this exact same type of work digitally, okay? And they can still use their existing lighting setups and still participate inside of that exact same kind of process, with the tools that we find here in Moto. So let's get out of this gray world and also reduce the impact of the global illumination engine inside of our scene. And this is how I always start every single render. The first thing I do is I turn off the impact of the environment, right? I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the gray gradient, and I don't want to see its impact on the scene itself, right? By turning off the influence of our environment, we focus our attention on what the direct light sources are producing. This is good technique. Believe it or not, all computer graphics rendering engines, they want to use direct light sources to illuminate our scene. The indirect stuff, the environment, that gray gradient is like icing on the cake. It kind of fills in some shadow information, but the illumination should still be coming from direct light sources, right? So let's do it real fast. Let's start turning off our environment. Now, I mentioned before that gray gradient, I want to get rid of it. And I want to kind of get a black box, a black environment that will really help me understand directly how my lights are illuminating my scene. Where can I go to influence the environment? You got it, absolutely. And if you cruise down into your shader tree, the environment section is going to give us what we're after. So here's the environment section. We open it up. Here is the actual environment that's causing or creating that gray gradient. And once again, if we were to open it up, here's the material. Awesome. Okay? This material is the actual item inside of our rendering system that is going to determine the colors of our background. And right now, the environment type is set to this 4-color gradient. Of course, we can go and change this and manipulate it and do whatever we want to it. If you wanted your background to be, all sorts of crazy colors, you can quickly do that. However, I think for my purposes today, what I'm going to choose to do is change my environment type from a 4-color gradient to a constant color. You can see instantly how that changes our scene. Okay? This is cool, right? This is pretty neat. Now we're kind of in this white box, but I want a black box. Okay? So let's change the zenith color from almost white to black. All right. There we go. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Now we're starting to get a little bit more direct understanding as to how the direct light sources inside of our scene are influencing our object. Now, I don't want to be casting black reflection rays and indirect rays into our environment. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to return to the environment itself, the little colored sphere here. If you click on the colored sphere, you're going to get 4 properties. Okay? Visible to camera, visible to indirect rays, reflection rays, and refraction rays. I'm going to turn off 2 through 4. Basically, the only one that I'm going to keep on is the first one, visible to camera. So it's in the environment section, and I've just clicked on the environment, not the material. And I'm just really making sure that this black color, this black environment, is not being used to give me a false read on the foreground subject here. I just want to see, at the moment, while I set up all of my lights, the impact of each one of these lights and really understand what they're doing to describe my scene. Okay? We'll turn this on later to get a little bit more of a, to kind of fill in some shadow information. Indirect illumination is incredibly invaluable for us, but we want to just really understand the role of direct illuminations inside of our scene first. Yes, you do. You're just in the wrong area. Because they're part of every environment, okay? Where are you on inside of your scene?
I'm on environments and
There you go. Well, you're on the material at the moment. Yeah. Click on the environment itself, the one right above it. There you go.
okay.
Okie dokie. We want to keep visible to camera enabled. All right. In every sense, what I have done here is I've turned off all the lights in our scene. Okay? And then, like traditional photographers do, we turn on individual lights and really understand the impact of each of these lights on the lighting setup on our scene. Okay? We're turning off the lights, and then we're turning each one on individually. So I have my area light on here right now, and you can see its impact inside of the scene. Much like real-world lights, the closer our lights are to the subject, the brighter it's going to be. And right now, this is not really super bright, so I'm going to select my area light and simply move it closer. And yeah, there it is. Now, with the light closer to the object, we're getting something that's a little bit more generally, kind of pleasantly illuminated. Let's look at some options here, though. And let's look at the kind of some strategies on how we can create really great lighting setups. I'm going to look at my scene from the top here, and I want you to just kind of zero in on this for a second, okay? So if you look at the relationship of the camera to the vase, the camera is kind of shooting straight on down at the vase. And let's change our light's position here for a second. I want to rotate it around. Or rotate this light around. And there we go. And I'm going to move this light so that it's parallel, kind of directly in line with the camera itself. Okay? So check it out. If you look at the objects that are influenced in our scene, the light selected, there's the vase. The camera, of course, is pointing this direction. And the light rays are also pointing the exact same direction. The illumination rays are parallel to what's often referred as the camera ray, right? The direction the camera is facing. And you can see the result that we're getting inside of the render itself. Let's just make a render real fast. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Make a render. because in my mind, I'm building this picture with light, okay? I'm not taking a picture, I'm not capturing a picture, I'm making it. Pictures are made. They're not random, okay? We make these things, okay? So let's make a render. And what we've produced here is a generally horrible image, right? This is just an ugly picture. This is a picture that's called, or it's often referred to as flat, which is an interesting idea, especially if you consider what we're using to make this picture, right? We're using actual 3D geometry to make this picture, yet the result that we're getting looks really two-dimensional, right? Why does it look two-dimensional? Why is this a bad render? There's no shadow, and there's no highlights. There's no change in tonal value across the surface of our object, right? Has anyone taken an art theory class or a color theory class? A couple of you guys, good. What is tonal value?
Tonal value is when you have a really dark spot at the center or a really light spot at the center, and then as it moves out from that light pinpoint, it diffuses. Or as an example, when you shine a light on an object, your shadow is going to be an opposite color of the light that's being reflected onto your object because of refraction.
You got it. And I think we can just kind of simply distill that down into it's just a gradient of brightness, right? We want to sculpt our 3D objects with light. We want to have areas on the object that are brighter than others. When everything is being blasted from the front with a single light, we're not creating that change in value across the surface of our object. My vase here does not look cylindrical at all, right? It looks like a cookie cutter, cardboard cutout of a vase. It doesn't look like a piece of 3D geometry because the light isn't changing its brightness across the surface of the object. It doesn't look cylindrical. It doesn't look 3D. This is the fastest way to break your render. It's to flatten the lighting. It's to shine to shine your light in the exact same orientation as your camera like I have here. And I'll go back into my 3D view so you guys can get a better understanding of what I'm talking about, okay? Flat lighting is bad lighting. We don't want flat lighting, okay? Here's my camera. Here's my aerial light. They're both shining, or they're both pointed in the exact same direction, okay? This is bad. We don't want this, right? Thus enter the role of the 3-point lighting setup. The 3-point lighting setup does a great job of kind of quickly describing our object with light, okay? We're going to be creating 3 lights. 3. These 3 lights have a defined role, and let's start building this 3-point lighting setup and make this vase something a little bit more engaging and attractive, okay? So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to really dial in what's called the key light, okay? The key light, instead of all lighting setups, and this is something that traditional photographers have been doing for a while, the key light is going to motivate the light source, right? It's going to kind of establish the illusion that there's a light off camera that's illuminating the entire scene. If we've done our job correctly, it should look as though one light is illuminating everything, even though in actuality, there's going to be 3 or 4 lights, right? We want it to look like one light is illuminating our scene. That one light is called the key light, okay? The key light, okay? We want to place the key light at an angle to the subject. So here's our vase. I want to light my objects from the, oops, drew my arrow the wrong way. I want to draw my object or render my, oh my gosh. Let's try that again. I want to light it from the sides, okay? By lighting it from the sides, we're going to have, of course, this side's going to get a lot of illumination, but the opposite side, this side over here, is going to be in shadow, allowing us to start to generate the tonal value change that we're after. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab my aerial light, start moving it around. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Let's look at it in perspective. There we go. Pretty great. I'm going to change my action center to selection just to make it a little bit easier to rotate these things around. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. What if I'm going to make this light just a little bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. Let's make a picture. Let's take a render now. So now what we're seeing is the impact of just that one light illuminating our subject from the sides. And now we have a little bit of drama. Now we have just a little bit of interest. It's still not bright enough. It's a little bit dark, so we can change that easily in our lighting setup. But now at least we're suggesting to the audience that there's more on the shadow side, right? That the surface curves around away from the light rays and creating the illusion of a three-dimensional shape. I want to make it a little bit brighter. Let's put my radiance to 5. Yeah, that's pretty good right in there. All right, I like that. So that's the key light. It creates the illusion of general illumination inside of our scene. And let's be good stewards here. Let's just name our lights as we go. It's the key light. Because if you remember 2 seconds ago, I mentioned that there's actually three lights that are going to be players in our lighting setup. The key light, general illumination. The second one is called the fill light. Okay? If we return to our example and look at what the computer's created for us, the fill light has a singular role. The fill light is really all about taking or going in and just pumping a little bit of illumination, some light rays, on this side. It's going to fill in the shadows a little bit and suggest or help suggest to the audience that there's the opposite side of the vase in the render itself. The fill light is always going to be darker. It's going to be dimmer than the key light, right? Because keep in mind, the illusion of the key light is of the primary light source inside the scene. So since we want to have our fill light be on the opposite side, here's our key light right here. I want my fill light to be over here, okay? Blasting out illumination rays like this, okay? Now, one of the cool things about working inside of Moto is that items can and should be duplicated. So here's what I want to do. I want to change my action center to origin, grab my light, open up my modeling tools, and I'm going to mirror this light across the x-axis. There we go. Let's make a picture. Let's see what the effect is now. And we're going to get a different effect. There we go. Luckily, it doesn't take long to draw all these frames. Looking cool. Now we're marching towards something that's a little bit more visually interesting, right? This is not a bad picture. It's not a great picture, but it's not a bad picture, right? It's not exactly what I'm going for here. If you look very specifically at what that second light has created for us, yeah, we're getting some really great illumination on this side. Since I mirrored my key light, the illumination on the screen left side is identical to the illumination brightness on the screen right side. Okay? We get this lovely shade of darkness in the middle, which is kind of fun. It kind of suggests the three-dimensional nature of this object, but we can do better. Okay? We can do a lot better. The fill light, and let's name this real fast. This is the fill light. No, it's not the fill, like the name fill. I'm just being silly. It's the F-I-L-L, fill light. The fill light's going to be much, much darker, dimmer than the key light. So with the fill light selected, I'm going to return to my light properties and just dump down my radiance. The key light was at 5. Let's put this at 1. Let's just see what we get. This is where we're going to have to begin to experiment, and I am loving it. Okay? Let's make another picture and see what the differences are. When you're doing the lighting part of any project, you're going to have to do a lot of renders like this, right? And things are starting to look a little bit better. I'm liking this, okay? This is starting to look pretty cool. I'm digging it, right? Let's compare and contrast how far we've come and the differences between all of these pictures, okay? So here we are. with the key light on the right side of our vase and the fill on the left, okay? Here's where we started, right? This is the flat lighting setup where the light was in the exact same position and orientation as the camera. So there's step one. Here's step last. Flat and boring and dull in every sense. Interesting and engaging, right? Here's the flat lighting setup. Then we changed the key light's position to illuminate our subject from the side, and now we're infusing a little bit of drama in here. We're having some shadow information that's suggesting that this object's curving away from the camera, which is pretty cool. We then duplicated our light, mirrored it across the x-axis. Now we're blasting light upon two different directions at the vase, and we're starting to get something that's close to what we're after. And then finally, after reducing the brightness of our fill light, you can see that we're pretty close to what the final result's going to be. I think I still want to go in and play around with the brightness of my key light. It doesn't quite look like it's bright enough to me. Let me just do that real fast. I'm going to grab my key light. Let's put this to a value of 8. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty good. Out there in the real world, if you're really into this, what we're effectively establishing here is called the contrast ratio. Contrast is the difference of brightness or the difference of a value from one side of the image to the other side of the image. When the contrast ratio is 1 to 1, that means both sides are the exact same brightness, right? By reducing the contrast ratio, we're infusing drama and visual interest, okay? One of the big problems that we have at the moment, and if we look at the scene here, we can very quickly see this, okay, is that at the moment, the background of our object kind of feels like it's just gobbling up our vase. The black background is kind of wrapping itself around our object, and we don't have separation between the foreground, the vase, and the background, the blackness, okay? Let's check it out here real fast. Let's just go look at our scene at 100%. Yeah, this is, it looks like the black background is right next to our object. Like there's nothing between, there's no void or space between the back of the vase and the back of the scene. And I'm putting scene in finger quotes, okay? So we need to separate these objects out. We want to start, making planes inside of our three-dimensional space. We want to start suggesting that the background of our scene is like a mile away from our vase. And we do this easily with lights, okay? Thus enter the role of our third and final light in our three-point lighting setup. The third light is called a rim light. I'm going to use an area light to do the job. I'm going to go to my item list, lights, area lights. All lights are created at the origin of our scene, and you can see the area light just chilling there. Let's rotate this guy around 180 degrees. And I'm going to put the rim light. I always kind of shine the rim light at the shoulders of our object. And you can already see the impact of the rim light on the model itself in the preview. It's a little too bright. I'm going to back it off some. Yeah, let's make a picture. That's starting to look a whole lot better. What we're doing here is that we're trying to make the tonal value, the brightness of the pixels, kind of like right around the shoulders, just a little bit brighter than the areas that they're immediately surrounding it. And you can see the result that I have here. And now it's starting to feel like the background is a little bit further away from our foreground, right? Look at that. How awesome is that? And specifically, what my eye and what my creative brain is looking at here is all that kind of this lovely little white, I'm not going to draw on top of it, but these lovely white pixels or lighter pixels right around the shoulder area of our vase. This rim light is doing a great job of separating the background from the foreground. I like this. And let's compare and contrast once again. So here's with the rim light on. And here's with it off. On and off. And maybe it's still a little too bright. I'm going to leave it as is just to kind of illustrate the idea that we're going for here. This is starting to feel like a three-dimensional shape that's being illuminated by a couple different lights. It feels like it's something that's grounded in reality now, just thanks to the position and the placement of all the lights inside of our scene. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? Very cool. Now, what's really great about working with many lights inside of our scene is that we can start getting a little bit more dramatic. Now that we have the general illumination established, let's get creative here. Let's start having a little bit more fun with this, because not all lights have to be the same color. Not all lights, no lights are white. All lights are shades of yellow and blue. And of course, we can naturally get very abstract with this as well. So what if we went in, and this is why you want to start naming all of your lights. Here's the rim light. I'm going to drag this below my fill, key, fill, rim, okay? What if the key light was a different color? So with it selected, I'll travel back over to its properties, and let's just experiment. What would happen if I blasted, some red at that? Well, that's kind of dramatic. Or how about we do like a real fun orange? What would it look like if I blasted some blue light at it on one side? That's cool. Or how about green light? Interesting. Let's do green. Why not? Let's do a little bit of green on the key. And the fill, we'll do an opposite color just to have fun with it. The fill will do like a blue. Now, if we take a picture, make a render here, now it looks like my vase is sitting in front of like a neon sign outside of the window of the apartment or something, right? We can start having fun with light and change the mood of our entire scene just by changing the color of all of this stuff.
How do you get that thing around the edges? What is that light called?
It's called the rim light, and it goes immediately behind our subject, and it fires off, or it fires towards the shoulders of our light, of our subject. Okay, so here's my rim light. See how it's pointing down, kind of at the back shoulders. The green is making me want to throw up, so I'm going to change it to a nice shade of orange. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. Now, up until right now, our object has been floating in this void. It's been floating in this black void. It really doesn't feel grounded in some sort of environment. We're not getting any sort of indication from the renders that it's sitting on something, right? Let's make it sit on something. Let's give it an actual set, a scene, a ground, or an environment for it to live in. Now, we're not going to do this with a picture. We're going to make some geometry for this, okay? So I'm going to get rid of my shadow catcher. We actually don't need the shadow catcher anymore. Oops, I accidentally hit the wrong one. No, I'm good. And on an empty mesh item, let's just create a big rectangle. And of course, we'll be good stewards and center it in the origin. And let's do this. I'm going to take that back edge, and I'm going to use a great tool called Edge Extend, which is it's kind of like the bevel tool for edges. And it's going to allow me to grow a wall from that single edge. Keyboard shortcut for Edge Extend is Z. Z is in zebra or xylophone. And if I fire off the Edge Extend command and click in the viewport, I'll get some handles. I'm just going to pull up on it. And now I have a wall. Let's go back into our render real fast and see how that's changing the illusion inside of our scene. And whoa, now our environment looks completely different, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we want to control it a little bit more, okay? We have some good things in here, and we have some bad things in here. Let me maximize the preview window so we can see a little bit more carefully and closely what the good and bad are. Dun, 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 dun. So good things that I'm seeing in here. I'm loving the illumination that we're getting from this big key light. I think that's really neat. Bad things that we need to change, okay? Me no likey, this hard line that we're seeing in the back of my room. I want to change that. I want to soften it a little bit. Because right now, what that hard line is producing is just some ugly blackness. The shadows are kind of pooling at that transition, right? And I want to eliminate that. In addition, I also have some other problems that I need to mitigate, okay? Specifically, look at the ground. How many lights do I have illuminating my scene at the moment? 3, right? We can easily see the impact of our key light. It's blasting this way. This area of my ground and a majority of my scene kind of has that yellowish hue coming from my key light. But what about behind? What about all of this jazz? Look here. Is that yellow? No. What color is it? White. That's the rim light, okay? The rim light I left as white. It's breaking the illusion almost instantly that the key light is the only illuminator inside of my scene, right? By having a a couple different light colors on the ground plane, it's breaking the illusion. Do you have a question? They're all area lights. Yeah, I'm choosing area lights because we can really kind of focus them. I think for something like this, I would either do it with area lights or spotlights. Yeah, question. So I just grab the edge, hit the Z key, and then you get some action handles in your scene. You just left click and drag up. So I got some problems in here. But luckily, it doesn't take too much energy to solve our problems. Okay? Let's figure out this ground plane issue in the back. I want to get rid of that hard line. This is the easiest. This is the low-hanging fruit. And I've been doing this for years. I've selected the edge that represents the transition between the wall and the floor. Okay? And if you simply just run edge bevel, I'm going to round it out, make a cove. My round level is at 3. If we return to our render, yeah, okay, good. That's pretty great. I'm liking this. I'm liking this a lot. Yeah, me likey. There's some good stuff in there. Now we've kind of removed that dark, ugly line in the background of our scene. But there's still some work in here that we need to do. And specifically, I need it to look like the ground is exclusively being illuminated by the key light. Okay? I want to start controlling what is illuminating our objects in our scene. Okay? So let's do that real fast. This is called light linking, and it's a little bit of a challenge to set up. If the guys and gals down at the Foundry are listening to our live stream, this is something that they could easily and should continue to refine and work on. But let me show you the steps. In order to kind of filter what lights are illuminating what objects or items inside of our scene, we first initially have to create a group. I'm going to select the mesh item that represents the scene, my little background, and place it in a group. And this is the part that I don't like. We had to actually go back out into the modeling tab to get this job done. So I'm going to go into my modeling layout, and in item mode, I'm going to select the mesh item that's responsible for our scene. And while we're here, let's just be good stewards and just name this scene. There we go. All right. So with this scene mesh item selected, I now can go to the top right-hand portion of my interface. We've been hanging out in the item list and in the images or the clips section, but what we need to go into is that groups tab, because this is where we're going to be able to create a group. Groups, okay? Now, since I have my scene mesh item selected, all I really need to do is hit new group. You'll get a popover that looks something similar to this. Of course, we're going to have to give a name to this group. Let's just call this set pieces, okay? We're going to leave the type of group set to standard, and the mode, check this out, it's from selected items. That's why we initially selected that mesh item first, right? All right, let's hit OK, see what we got. Awesome. Now, the cool thing about working in the group palette inside here in Moto is that we can easily see the contents of our group just by clicking on this little plus sign, and there it is. It tells us exactly what's saved in that group. We'll be able to access that group over back in our render layout. Let's return to our render layout and start establishing this light linking situation. Now, we have to do this on a per light basis, okay? I only want my background to really be illuminated by the key light, okay? So on the fill and rim light, let's do the fill light. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the rim light first because I think that's going to be the most easily seen because you can really see the impact of the rim light in the render. So let's do the rim light first. And I'll go over into my area light properties. And here we go. Light linking. Yeah, go ahead. So yeah, let's go back to the group thing for a second. So it's most easily done by going into the modeling layout, right? And in item mode, selecting your scene, your background, okay? Once it's selected, we can return to the top right-hand corner of our interface where we have a Groups tab, kind of chilling over by our item list. So all I've done is I've selected the mesh item that contains my set. The entire set. That's all I've done at this point. And then I've traveled over to the Groups tab. And keep in mind, you have to do this in item mode. Okay? And then I just hit New Group. That's all I did. And I gave it a name. That's it. That's literally all I did. No, I did it in the Groups tab, in the modeling layout. Upper right-hand corner of your interface. Give it a name and hit OK. All right. And that's it. That's all I've done. With that in tow, we can return to the render layout and really start creating the illusion that we're after. Okay? Now keep in mind, I always like to, whenever I'm doing this, I always like to draw focus on the goal. What am I trying to accomplish here? Okay? I'm trying to deactivate the visibility or the influence of the rim light on my environment. I only want my rim light illuminating my vase. I don't want it illuminating the background. Okay? So let's select the rim light. And now, if we go over into the Properties tab, I just need to make sure that the Area Light Properties tab, the vertical tab on the right, is selected. And then down towards the bottom, we have an entire category of options called light linking. Okay, mine's currently collapsed, but if we open it up, we're really going to have three little simple controls. Okay, the first one, we're going to start at the top, work our way down to the bottom. First one, we want to turn on control light linking. Boop. Okay. Now the item group is going to be set pieces, right? The group that I just created. And let's force it to re-render here. Now, I've noticed this before, and I honestly think that this is a bug. If we change the mode from exclude to include, and force an update, and then switch it back to exclude, yeah, there it works. Okay? Yeah, it's the strangest thing in the world. If you don't see an impact, if nothing changes, here's what I do. I change the mode from exclude to include. Okay? There it is. It's on again. Dun, da, da, da. And then I'll change it to exclude. And there it is. Okay? And if you look carefully at what's being created here, this is actually starting to look pretty realistic. I'm liking this, right? It's starting to look like my big orange light, my key light, is the only thing blasting light rays out into the scene. But is this the case? Nope. Okay? Nope. Okay. Okay. That's not necessarily that could be a many different things. Okay. It could be the orientation of your lights inside the scene itself, right? Your lights could be kind of pointed towards the background. Your background could be very close to your vase, which is going to influence its illumination. So we could do the exact same thing here for our fill light too, Let's just see what happens. I'm going to turn on light linking. The item group is going to be set pieces. I'll change the mode to include, and then back to exclude, just so we can get an idea of its impact and role inside the scene. And that's a bug. I really do think a bug. Changing the mode from exclude to include to back to exclude again, that's just a bug in the system to kind of like activate light linking.
I have a pretty good base going on.
Say again?
I said I have a pretty good base going on.
Yeah, it looks pretty good, right? Mine looks pretty good. Mine looks pretty good. Now, the cool thing about working with actual geometry in the set itself is that we now can customize it a little bit. We can get texture in there. We can start infusing some more information that will make it look a little bit more, photorealistic, like it's actually being filmed inside of a studio, right? Here's a simple little trick that I've been doing for generations, it seems like, okay? I'm going to go back into my scene mesh item, and I'm going to, in my polygonal selection mode, I'm just going to give it a material group. That way I can start to colorize and add textures to that scene. Okay. Maybe let's play around with colors, right? Right now my scene is, the material for my scene is white. What if I change it to a dark gray? Well, that changes things pretty dramatically, right? Now our object is kind of popping off the screen a little bit, which I really, really like. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Now it feels like it's sitting in a world, in a three-dimensional space, but the foreground object is just grabbing your attention, right? You're almost forced to look at that vase, okay? Just by changing the color of the material that's responsible for shading the background. I've darkened it quite significantly, okay? I just created a material. I assigned a material to the polygons on my set. I just changed the color of it. I'm just experimenting right now. This is the cool thing about working inside of Moto, is that we very quickly can build these renders and experiment and iterate and ask ourselves, okay, how can I change the lighting setup or maybe a simple material change to create a different look? Let's add some texture in there. I've been doing this for an eon, it seems like, right? I'm going to go into my scene material group, and I'm going to generate what's called a procedural texture. A procedural texture is an image that the computer is making for us, okay? It's not one that we download from the internet or from textures.com. Thanks to some big thinking by the developers down at the Foundry, an algorithm is going to create this image for us. With my material group selected, I can go to the Add Layer pull-down menu at the top of the shader tree, and I'm going to go into Textures. Now, these are the default textures, the simple textures. But there's actually this enhanced Moto texture. These are all procedural ones as well, and there are some rock stars in there. There really are. So we have two groups. I'll let you explore these and what they look like. Today I'm just going to go into the textures section, and let's do this. Let's just do a grid. Okay, now my grid needs to be adjusted, right? And as we remember from previous conversations about textures, the texture locator is responsible for placing this image on the actual object itself. And let's do this. It's just way too big at the moment. Let's shrink it down some. Yeah, oh, way too big. And let's change the projection type from solid to planar along the y-axis. There's our grid. Okay. The cool thing about procedural textures is that we can continue to craft and adjust their effect. If we go into the texture layers section here it is, check it out. We can actually change the width of all of this stuff, the line width, the transition width. Let's change the line width a little bit. Looks a little too big for me. Make it real thin. There we go. The transition width will make it real thin as well. These kind of small, very simple lines, okay? Now, I don't want it to be kind of this white texture on top of my environment. So here's what I want to do. I want to just change the effect from diffuse color over to bump. We've talked about bump maps before in our conversations about working with textures. And bump maps are going to create the illusion of height, the illusion of peaks and valleys inside of the scene. Yeah, that's cool. If I change on the material itself, looks like it's bumping in too much. Maybe I reduce the bump amplitude a little bit. Oops, too small. That's okay. Dark is not a bad thing. Oops. Yeah, these things are created. They're crafted, right? There we go. Let's reduce it a little bit more. Going for a very faint, small, little bumpy texture here. And that's okay. Something very small and faint. That's perfect. That's exactly where I'm going. Okay. And now we have something that's just a little bit more visually interesting, right? Something that's beginning to look a little bit more photorealistic. Something that's suggesting certain things to our audience and reminding them that this object is a living, breathing piece of sculpture in a living, breathing world. The moment we escaped the impact and influence of that gray gradient, man, it feels to me like this entire world changed in front of my eyes. Okay? And I'm digging it.
How do I make the lines darker?
The lines darker, go into that texture layers section. Yeah, and you can start, fiddling around with all these properties and create and, work towards creating a great little render. That's the cool thing about working with procedurals, is that we can customize their appearance in Moto. We're not locked into what the photograph captured. And after a minute or so of rendering, almost done. And I love this moment where we get to take a step back and look at what we've created, how far we've come in a short amount of time. Mine's pretty dark and moody. I think if this was a render that I was going to make for an advertisement, I think I'd probably need to increase the brightness of especially my key light and my fill light, just to make the foreground object jump off the screen a little bit more. I also want to tweak the colors a little bit to get, I think, a better result. But this is pretty great. I'm liking this. I am 5 minutes away from a final product. If we examine where we started, okay, so that's where we started. That's where we ended. I think we all can agree that the result that we came up with is far superior to where we ended. By adding lights, creating changes in tonal value, experimenting the role and influence of color, and by infusing depth with that rim light and the creation of a background, we've gone from 0 to hero in not long at all, right? Now we've created something that is actually portfolio worthy, more than just the standard run-of-the-mill gray gradient, something that an audience member is going to want to look at, right? And that's our job. That's our responsibility as the author here. We're creating these pieces of artwork not necessarily for us, but for our audience, right? All right, questions. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool.
So if I increase the bias, what does that do?
So the bias on textures, and what AJ is talking about here, he's working with his procedural texture, okay? I go over into my texture layers. Here's how I think of it, and this is because bias and gain are words that my brain just can't handle. But for me, this is how I kind of interpolate bias and gain. This is brightness, and this is brightness, and gain is contrast.
So if I increase the gain, I increase the contrast between the two colors?
Not necessarily. It depends on the texture, and it depends on the colors that the texture is creating. Awesome. Awesome.
But it creates, I can't get how you did those pivots in yours.
Yeah, I changed my grid to a bump. The effect, it went from diffuse color to bump. Yeah.
Go back into my texture map and change my grid.
All right. Questions, questions, questions. We've been going for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. So let's take a break. Okay? Let's just take a quick break. Why does my vase look different? Probably because of the lighting.
Hey, Pat, can you pop mine up there really quick?
Hold on 2 seconds, and Kevin has a question. It has everything to do with the lighting, right? Yeah, yours is there. It's there.
But yours is like,
Yeah, mine's, it has everything to do with the lights, right? What type of lights are you using?
I'm using the area.
Area lights, yeah. I can see that the placement of one of your area lights is very, very close.
Yeah.
You know, look at how you're illuminating your object, okay? If you're illuminating it from the sides like I am, and by adjusting the brightness of the light on either side, we're going to create natural peaks and valleys, natural shadows and highlights. All right, let's take a break. Actually, I'm going to stop the live stream there because the rest is going to be for lab, and we're looking at all our 3D printing stuff.